My name is Elena. I'm 26, and last October my sister Cassandra destroyed 3 years of my artistic work with one deliberate act of jealousy that changed everything. When I ran to my parents devastated and desperate, my mom sighed and said, "Oh, honey, you're being too dramatic," while my dad actually smirked and added, "Maybe this art thing just isn't meant to be." They thought that was the end of my artistic dreams. They had no idea what I was capable of when backed into a corner. Before I tell you how I transformed this devastating betrayal into the most empowering moment of my life, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more stories about family sabotage and the sweet taste of justice. I grew up in a middle-class household in Portland, Oregon, where creativity was tolerated but never truly celebrated. From as early as I can remember, I was drawn to art, sketching in the margins of school notebooks, painting watercolors at the kitchen table, sculpting clay figures from playground dirt. My parents, Linda and Richard, were practical people who valued stability and conventional success over artistic expression. My younger sister Cassandra, just 2 years behind me at 24, had always been everything I wasn't: outgoing, socially confident, and completely uninterested in anything that required patience or solitude. While I spent hours perfecting shading techniques and color theory, Cassandra was the social butterfly, dating popular guys and planning weekend parties that my parents found refreshingly normal. I was the first in my family to pursue higher education in the arts, earning my bachelor's degree in fine arts from Portland State University. My parents attended my graduation ceremony, but spent most of the time discussing Cassandra's latest boyfriend and her new job at a trendy boutique downtown. When I announced my acceptance into a prestigious Master of Fine Arts program specializing in mixed media sculpture, my mother's response was a concerned frown. "Are you sure that's practical, sweetie? How will you support yourself making art?" My father was more blunt. "At least Cassandra has a real job. When will you start thinking about your future?" The irony wasn't lost on me that I was thinking about my future, just not the one they envisioned for me. My MFA program was incredibly competitive, accepting only 12 students annually. My thesis project was an ambitious mixed media installation exploring themes of identity and belonging, incorporating sculpture, digital projections, and interactive elements. For 3 years, I had been developing this body of work. My thesis installation, titled Fragments of Home, consisted of 7 large-scale sculptural pieces, each representing a different aspect of family dynamics and personal growth. The sculptures were intricate combinations of found objects, cast metals, fabric elements, and integrated technology that responded to viewer movement. Each piece had taken months to conceptualize and execute. My thesis advisor, Professor Maria Santos, was one of the most respected contemporary artists on the West Coast. She had taken a particular interest in my work, calling it profoundly personal yet universally resonant. Her mentorship meant everything to me. She saw potential in my art that my family never acknowledged. "Elena, your work has real commercial and artistic merit," she had told me just weeks before the incident. "The gallery connections I'm making for you could launch your career. This exhibition isn't just a graduation requirement, it's your debut as a professional artist." The gallery exhibition was scheduled for the first week of November at the prestigious Morrison Gallery downtown. This wasn't just any student show. Morrison Gallery was known for launching emerging artists' careers. Several established collectors and art critics had confirmed their attendance, along with representatives from galleries in Seattle and San Francisco. Professor Santos had spent months arranging this opportunity. "This is the kind of exposure most artists don't get until years into their careers," she had explained. "Your work is strong enough to stand alongside established artists." The pressure was immense, but so was the opportunity. A successful exhibition could mean gallery representation, commissioned works, and the beginning of a sustainable artistic career. Everything I had worked toward for 3 years came down to this one showing. My family's response to this opportunity was predictably dismissive. When I explained the significance of exhibiting at Morrison Gallery, my mother nodded absently while sorting through mail. "That's nice, dear. Will there be refreshments at your little art show?" My father was characteristically blunt. "How much is this costing us? And what happens when it doesn't work out?" Cassandra's reaction was different, a sharp, calculating look that I didn't fully understand at the time. "Wow, Elena, that sounds really important," she had said, her voice carrying an edge I couldn't quite identify. "I'm sure all your artist friends will be so impressed." The week before my exhibition was scheduled to open, I brought my completed sculptures home to my parents' house for final preparations. The gallery installation wouldn't begin until 3 days before the opening, giving me time to make any last-minute adjustments and photograph each piece for my portfolio documentation. I had converted our garage into a temporary studio space, carefully arranging my 7 sculptures for final review. Each piece represented hundreds of hours of work, conceptual development, material experimentation, construction, and refinement. The largest sculpture, Foundation, stood nearly 6 feet tall and incorporated elements representing different family members. Another piece, Echoes, used motion sensors to trigger audio recordings of family dinner conversations I had collected over the years. The technology integration had been the most challenging aspect. I had worked with the university's digital arts department to program responsive elements that would activate when viewers approached each sculpture. LED lights would shift in intensity, speakers would play layered audio compositions, and in one piece, a small motor would slowly rotate elements to reveal hidden components. On the Tuesday before my Friday gallery opening, I was making final adjustments to the electronic components when I heard the front door slam. Cassandra's voice echoed through the house, louder and more agitated than usual. I could hear her talking to our parents in the kitchen, her tone increasingly heated. "It's not fair," she was saying. "Elena gets all this attention for her weird art projects while I'm working real jobs and nobody cares." My mother's voice was soothing, placating. "Now, Cassie, your sister has worked very hard on this." "Hard work." Cassandra's laugh was bitter. "She plays with clay and calls it a career. I'm the one dealing with real customers and real responsibilities every day." I tried to focus on my work, but their conversation was escalating. Through the kitchen window that faced the garage, I could see Cassandra gesturing wildly while my parents sat at the table. "You should see how pretentious she's gotten," Cassandra continued, talking about installations and exhibitions like she's some famous artist. "It's embarrassing." My father's response was muffled, but I caught the general dismissive tone. This wasn't the first time they had discussed my work this way, but hearing it directly stung more than I expected. I put on my headphones and tried to concentrate on calibrating the motion sensors for echoes. The piece was particularly personal. It incorporated audio recordings of family dinners where my artistic ambitions were subtly undermined or ignored. The irony of working on it while overhearing a similar conversation wasn't lost on me. An hour later, I heard footsteps approaching the garage. Cassandra appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She had changed into jeans and an old sweater, and her earlier agitation seemed to have settled into something colder. "So this is the famous art that's going to make you rich and famous?" she asked, walking slowly among my sculptures. I removed my headphones, immediately on guard. Cassandra rarely showed interest in my work, and when she did, it usually preceded some form of criticism or mockery. "These are my thesis pieces," I said carefully. "They're going to be exhibited at Morrison Gallery this weekend." She stopped in front of Foundation, the tallest sculpture that incorporated symbolic representations of our family structure. "This one's supposed to be about us?" "It's about family dynamics in general," I replied, not wanting to get into the specific personal elements I had incorporated. Cassandra circled the piece slowly, and I noticed her jaw was clenched. "So, you're basically making art about how terrible your family is? How original." "That's not what it's about, Cassie. It's more nuanced than that." "Nuanced?" She repeated the word like it tasted bad. "Everything is so intellectual and complicated with you, isn't it?" I could feel the tension building, but I wasn't sure what had triggered this particular confrontation. "I'm just trying to finish these final preparations. The gallery installation starts tomorrow." "Right, the big important gallery show." Her voice dripped with sarcasm. "Where all the sophisticated art people will appreciate your genius, while the rest of us just don't understand." "Cassie, what is this really about?" She turned to face me directly, and I saw something in her expression that made my stomach drop. Pure, undiluted resentment. It's about you always getting special treatment because you're the artist, she spat. Mom and Dad may not understand what you do, but they still treat it like it's something special. You get to be the interesting one, the creative one, while I'm just ordinary Cassandra with her boring retail job. I was genuinely confused, but they constantly dismiss my work. They just called it impractical and unrealistic. At least they acknowledge it exists, she interrupted. When's the last time they asked about my goals or my dreams? Everything revolves around Elena's art projects and Elena's exhibitions and Elena's important career. The accusation was so far from my experience of family dynamics that I didn't know how to respond. From my perspective, Cassandra had always been the favored child, the one whose social life and conventional job choices were celebrated while my artistic pursuits were barely tolerated. I didn't know you felt that way, I said honestly. But taking it out on my work isn't going to solve anything. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your work. This pretentious junk that you think makes you better than everyone else. I don't think I'm better than anyone. I just want to succeed at something I'm passionate about. Success. She walked closer to Echoes, the piece with the most delicate electronic components. What happens if this precious exhibition doesn't go well? What if nobody buys your art or offers you a fancy gallery contract? The question hit closer to my fears than I wanted to admit. Then I'll keep working and try again. Or maybe, she said, her voice taking on a dangerous edge, maybe it's time you learned that the world doesn't revolve around your artistic vision. Before I could process what was happening, Cassandra grabbed the edge of Echoes and shoved it hard. The sculpture, which stood about 4 feet tall and housed delicate electronic components, crashed to the concrete floor. The sound was devastating, not just the impact, but the electronic pops and sparks as the integrated technology was destroyed. Cassie, I screamed, dropping to my knees beside the wreckage. The main structural element had cracked, and the carefully programmed circuit board was clearly damaged beyond repair. But she wasn't done. Before I could stop her, she kicked over Resonance, a smaller piece that incorporated hand-blown glass elements I had spent weeks creating. The glass shattered across the garage floor, 3 months of work destroyed in seconds. Stop. I lunged toward her, but she had already moved to Foundation, the centerpiece of my entire installation. Maybe this will teach you that your art isn't as important as you think it is, she snarled, and with both hands, she pushed the 6-foot sculpture as hard as she could. Foundation toppled backward, hitting the garage wall with a sickening crash. The impact damaged not only the sculpture itself, but also triggered a domino effect that knocked over 2 other pieces I had carefully positioned nearby. I stood frozen in the wreckage of my 3 years of work, watching Cassandra survey the destruction with satisfaction. 5 of my 7 thesis pieces were damaged beyond repair. The electronic components I had spent months programming were destroyed. Months of metalwork, casting, and fabrication were ruined. Why? I whispered, the word barely audible above the ringing in my ears. Because I'm tired of everything being about you, she replied coldly. Now maybe you'll understand what it feels like when something you care about gets destroyed. I ran toward the house, desperately seeking help from my parents. I found them in the living room, my father reading his newspaper, while my mother watched television. The normalcy of the scene felt surreal given the catastrophe that had just occurred. Mom, Dad, I gasped, still shaking from shock. Cassie just destroyed my sculptures. She knocked them over deliberately. My entire exhibition is ruined. My mother looked up from her show with mild annoyance. Oh, honey, you're being too dramatic. I'm sure it's not as bad as you think. It is that bad, I insisted, my voice rising with panic. She destroyed 3 years of work. The gallery opening is in 3 days and 5 of my 7 pieces are completely ruined. My father glanced up from his newspaper with an expression of mild irritation. These things happen, Elena. Maybe this art thing just isn't meant to be. The casual cruelty of his words hit me like a physical blow. This art thing? Dad, this is my career. This exhibition could determine my entire future. Your future, My mother repeated with a dismissive wave. Sweetheart, maybe this is a sign that you should consider something more practical. Cassie has a stable job. She's thinking about her real future. At that moment, Cassandra appeared behind me, her expression carefully composed into innocence. It was an accident, she said smoothly. I was looking at her sculptures, and I bumped into one. It was just unstable and knocked over some of the others. I stared at her in disbelief. An accident? You deliberately pushed them over. You said you wanted to teach me a lesson. I was upset and said some things I didn't mean, she replied, her voice taking on a hurt tone. But I would never deliberately hurt your art, Helena. I know how much it means to you. My parents immediately rallied to her defense. See, my mother said. It was just an accident. These things happen when you have fragile art pieces lying around. They weren't lying around, I protested. They were carefully positioned in a workspace. And it wasn't an accident. She admitted she did it on purpose. You're obviously upset and confused, my father said dismissively. Accidents happen. Maybe you should have been more careful about where you put these delicate things. We'll help you clean up the mess, my mother added, as if broken sculptures were equivalent to spilled milk. And maybe you can make some simpler pieces for your little art show. Little art show? I repeated incredulously. This is a professional gallery exhibition. 3 years of work. My entire thesis. Well, surely they'll understand if you explain what happened, my mother said reasonably. Accidents are part of life. I looked between my parents and Cassandra, realizing with crystal clarity that no amount of explanation would change their perception of what had occurred. They had chosen their narrative, accident, overreaction, impractical art dreams, and nothing I said would alter it. This wasn't an accident, I said one final time, my voice steady despite the rage and heartbreak building inside me. And what happened here tonight will have consequences that you can't just dismiss or explain away. Without waiting for their response, I turned and walked back to the garage to survey the full extent of the damage. As I stood among the wreckage of my life's work, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The naive hope that my family would ever truly support my dreams finally died, but in its place, something much stronger was born. I pulled out my phone and began documenting everything: photographs of each destroyed piece, close-ups of the deliberate damage, video of the electronic components that had been destroyed. Then I called Professor Santos.
Elena?
It's nearly 10 o'clock. Is everything all right? No, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. Everything is not all right, but I need your help, and I think you're the only person who can give it to me. I explained what had happened, sending her the photos as we talked. Her response was immediate and fierce. This is sabotage, Elena. Pure and simple. Can you get to the university tonight? We need to assess what can be salvaged and figure out our options. I'll be there in an hour. Good. And Elena? Don't let them convince you this was anything other than a deliberate attack on your work and your future. I've seen your dedication and talent. We'll figure this out. As I gathered the salvageable pieces and loaded them into my car, I could see my family through the kitchen window, continuing their normal evening routine as if nothing significant had happened. The disconnect between their casual dismissal and the magnitude of what had been destroyed was staggering. But as I drove toward the university, I felt something I hadn't expected: determination. They had underestimated my resilience and my resourcefulness. They thought destroying my art would end my dreams. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Professor Santos was waiting for me in the sculpture studio when I arrived at 11 p.m., along with 2 graduate students who had volunteered to help assess the damage. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, the destruction looked even worse than it had in the garage. Show me everything, Professor Santos said quietly, her expression grim as she examined each broken piece. We worked methodically through the wreckage. Echoes was completely unsalvageable. The electronic components were destroyed, and the main structure irreparably damaged. Resonance had lost all its glass elements, which had taken weeks to create and couldn't be replaced in time. Foundation had a major structural crack that compromised its integrity. 2 pieces are completely intact, Professor Santos concluded after our assessment. 2 others have damage, but could potentially be repaired with intensive work. 3 are total losses. I sat on a work stool, staring at the remnants of 3 years of effort. The exhibition is in 3 days. There's no way to rebuild what was destroyed. No, she agreed. But there might be another way. She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through her contacts. I'm calling Marcus Chun at Pacific Arts Collective. He owes me a favor, and he's been following your work since your 2nd year. Marcus Chun was a respected curator and gallery owner who had visited our program several times as a guest lecturer. I had never imagined someone at his level would remember my work. Professor Santos stepped away to make the call, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. When she returned, her expression was cautiously optimistic. Marcus wants to see what we have left. He's coming in tomorrow morning. Elena, I told him what happened, not just the accident but the deliberate sabotage. He's furious on your behalf. Why would he care? Because he understands what it means when someone tries to destroy an artist's work. It's not just an attack on objects, it's an attack on creative expression itself. We spent the next hour carefully documenting the destroyed pieces and creating a plan for the salvageable work. The 2 intact sculptures would need to be professionally photographed. The 2 damaged pieces would require intensive repair work that might not be possible in the time remaining. Go home and get some sleep, Professor Santos finally said. Tomorrow we start fighting back. I drove back to my parents' house in the early hours of the morning, but I didn't go inside. Instead, I sat in my car in the driveway, thinking about everything that had changed in a single evening. My family had shown me exactly who they were and how little they valued my dreams. But they had also inadvertently connected me with people who did understand and appreciate my work. The next morning, I woke to several text messages from my mother. Elena, you need to come home and clean up that mess in the garage. Your father is upset about the damage to the wall. Cassie feels terrible about the accident. The least you could do is accept her apology. This sulking needs to stop. We're all family here. I deleted the messages without responding and drove to the university to meet Marcus Chun. He arrived exactly at 9 a.m., a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and an intensity that immediately commanded respect. Show me what happened, he said without preamble. I walked him through the destruction, explaining each piece and what it had represented. He listened carefully, occasionally asking technical questions about my process or conceptual approach. The deliberate nature of this destruction is obvious, he said finally. No accident creates this pattern of damage. Someone wanted to ensure maximum devastation. My family insists it was accidental. Your family is lying, either to you or to themselves. His bluntness was somehow comforting. The question now is what we do about it. Marcus examined the 2 intact pieces with professional scrutiny, taking notes and photos. These are strong works, Elena. Stronger than many artists produce in their entire careers. But it's not enough for a full exhibition. That depends on how we frame it. He was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking. What if we told the complete story? What if the exhibition became about more than just your thesis work? Professor Santos joined our conversation. What are you thinking, Marcus? I'm thinking about an exhibition called Resilience, Art Under Attack. We display the 2 intact pieces alongside documentation of the destroyed work. We tell the story of what happened and why. We make this about something bigger than just student art. I felt a flutter of possibility. Would that work? Would people actually come to see something like that? Elena, do you understand that what happened to you happens to artists all the time? Family members who don't understand, people who think they can destroy creative work without consequences? Your story isn't unique, but your response to it could be. Over the next hour, Marcus outlined a plan that was both ambitious and risky. Instead of trying to hide what had happened or scramble to replace the destroyed work, we would make the destruction part of the exhibition itself. We document everything, he explained. Photos of the destroyed pieces, recordings of you explaining what each work meant, testimony from witnesses about the deliberate nature of the destruction. We create an exhibition about the fragility and resilience of artistic expression. And you think people will want to see that? I think people will be fascinated by it. The art world loves stories of triumph over adversity. Your work is strong enough to stand on its own, but this narrative makes it unforgettable. Professor Santos was nodding enthusiastically. This could actually be more powerful than a traditional thesis exhibition. There's one more element, Marcus added. We invite your family to the opening. We give them a chance to see exactly what they dismissed and destroyed. The idea terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. What if they don't come? Then their absence becomes part of the story. But Elena, you need to understand something. This exhibition won't just be about your art anymore. It will be about your courage to stand up when someone tries to silence your voice. We spent the rest of the day planning the exhibition. The Morrison Gallery was fully supportive once Marcus explained the concept. Instead of a traditional student showing, this would be a professional exhibition with serious media attention. I want you to understand the stakes, Marcus warned me. This story will get coverage. Art journals, local media, possibly national attention. Your family's behavior will be part of the public record. I thought about Cassandra's deliberate destruction, my parents' casual dismissal, their inability to see the value in my work or my pain.
Good, I said.
Let them explain their actions to other people. The next 2 days were a whirlwind of preparation. We worked around the clock to create an exhibition that was part art show, part documentary evidence, part manifesto about the importance of supporting creative expression. The 2 intact sculptures were professionally lit and positioned to maximum effect. Large-format photographs of the destroyed pieces were mounted alongside detailed descriptions of their conceptual meaning and construction process. Video screens played recordings of me discussing each work and what it had represented. The most powerful element was a section titled Evidence of Destruction, featuring high-resolution photographs of the wreckage, quotes from family members dismissing the significance of the damage, and a timeline showing the deliberate nature of the sabotage. On the morning of the exhibition opening, I sent my family a formal invitation. You are invited to attend the opening of Resilience, Art Under Attack at Morrison Gallery. The exhibition features my thesis work and explores themes of creative expression, family dynamics, and the importance of supporting artistic endeavors. The opening reception is tonight at 7 p.m. My mother called within an hour. Elena, what is this about? Why does the invitation mention family dynamics? You'll understand when you see the exhibition. Are you making some kind of statement about us? Because if you're trying to embarrass the family, I'm telling the truth about what happened to my work. Whether that embarrasses you depends on how you feel about your actions. There was a long pause. Your father and I don't appreciate being dragged into your art projects. You dragged yourselves into it when you dismissed the destruction of my work as unimportant. I hung up before she could respond. That evening, I stood in Morrison Gallery watching people arrive for the opening. The space was filled with art collectors, critics, fellow students, and community members who had heard about the exhibition through word of mouth and media coverage. Professor Santos stood beside me, elegant in her gallery opening attire. How are you feeling? Terrified and exhilarated, I admitted. I never imagined my thesis exhibition would be anything like this. The best art comes from authentic experience, she replied. You've turned your pain into something meaningful. Marcus Chin approached us with a satisfied expression. Elena, I want you to know that 3 collectors have already expressed serious interest in purchasing work. The response tonight could launch your career. At 7:30, I spotted my family entering the gallery. They looked uncomfortable and out of place among the art world crowd, but they had come. Cassandra stayed close to our parents, her expression unreadable. I watched them move through the exhibition, their faces changing as they realized the scope and professionalism of what they were seeing. This wasn't a student art show. This was a serious professional exhibition with significant attendance and media coverage. When they reached the section documenting the destroyed artwork, I saw my mother's hand fly to her mouth. My father's face reddened as he read the detailed descriptions of each piece and what it had represented. Cassandra stood frozen, staring at the photographs of the wreckage she had created. A local art critic was interviewing visitors about their reactions to the exhibition. I watched my family quickly move away from that area, clearly uncomfortable with the public nature of the discussion. At 8 p.m., Marcus called for attention to give a brief speech about the exhibition. "Tonight we celebrate not just artistic achievement, but artistic resilience," he said. "Elena Harrison has transformed an act of sabotage into a powerful statement about the importance of supporting creative expression." The applause was warm and sustained. I felt tears prick my eyes as I looked out at the crowd of people who had come to see and appreciate my work. After the formal portion of the evening, my parents approached me. They looked shaken and uncertain. "Elena," my mother said quietly, "we need to talk." "About what?" I kept my voice neutral. "About this." My father gestured around the gallery. "We didn't understand that your art was this professional. You never asked about the details. You dismissed it as unimportant before learning what it actually involved." Cassandra had been hanging back, but now she stepped forward. Her face was pale, and her hands were shaking. "Elena, I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "I didn't understand what I was destroying. Seeing it displayed like this, reading about what each piece meant, I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I replied. "And more importantly, if you didn't care enough to ask before you destroyed it." "Can you forgive me?" she asked, tears starting to form in her eyes. I looked at my sister, seeing perhaps for the first time the insecurity and resentment that had driven her to such a destructive act. "I can forgive you," I said carefully, "but I can't forget what happened. And forgiveness doesn't erase consequences." "What consequences?" my father asked, his defensive tone returning. "The consequences of your choices becoming part of the public record," I said, gesturing toward the exhibition around us. "This story will be covered in art journals and local media. Your dismissal of my work and Cassandra's sabotage are now documented for anyone who's interested in the intersection of family dynamics and artistic expression." My mother's face went white. "You're using our family problems to promote your career?" "I'm using my experience to create meaningful art," I corrected. "The fact that it reflects poorly on your behavior isn't my responsibility." A well-dressed couple approached us, clearly wanting to discuss the exhibition with me. My family quickly excused themselves, but not before I overheard my father muttering to my mother about washing family laundry in public. The rest of the evening was a blur of conversations with collectors, critics, and fellow artists. By the time the gallery closed at 10 p.m., I had received 3 purchase offers for the intact sculptures and 2 commission requests for new work. Marcus found me as I was gathering my things. "Elena, I want to represent you going forward. This exhibition has generated the kind of buzz that most artists spend years trying to achieve." "Because of the destruction story?" "Because of how you responded to it. The art world respects resilience and authenticity. You've demonstrated both." As I drove home that night, I reflected on how completely my life had changed in just 1 week. The destruction of my thesis work, which had seemed like the end of my artistic dreams, had actually become the beginning of something much larger. My phone buzzed with a text from Professor Santos. "The Portland Arts Review wants to do a feature story on tonight's exhibition. Are you interested?" I was more than interested. I was ready to tell my story to anyone who would listen. The following weeks brought a level of media attention I had never expected. The Portland Arts Review feature led to interviews with regional art publications and a segment on the local morning news show. The story resonated with people who had experienced similar family dynamics or had struggled to have their creative work taken seriously. More importantly, the professional response exceeded my wildest expectations. Within a month, I had sold both intact sculptures and received commission requests for enough new work to sustain myself financially for the next year. Marcus connected me with other galleries interested in showing my work, and Professor Santos helped me apply for artist residencies and grants. My career was launching in ways I had never imagined possible when I was working on my original thesis pieces in my parents' garage. The relationship with my family required more complex navigation. My parents made several attempts to reconcile, but their apologies always came with qualifications and justifications that revealed they still didn't fully understand what they had done wrong. "We're proud of your success," my mother said during one awkward coffee meeting. "But we wish you could have achieved it without making the family look bad." "I didn't make the family look bad," I replied. I documented what actually happened. If that reflects poorly on your behavior, perhaps you should examine the behavior rather than criticizing the documentation. Cassandra's response was more genuine. She entered therapy to address the jealousy and resentment that had driven her to destroy my work, and slowly began to understand the magnitude of what she had done. "I keep thinking about how much time and emotion you put into each piece," she told me during one of our careful conversations. "When I destroyed them, I wasn't just breaking objects. I was attacking years of your life." "Yes," I agreed. "That's exactly what you were doing." "How do I make up for something like that?" "You start by never doing anything like it again. And you work to understand why you thought it was acceptable in the first place." Our relationship remained strained but gradually improved as Cassandra demonstrated through consistent actions that she was serious about changing her behavior and addressing her issues. 6 months after the exhibition, I moved into my own studio space, a converted warehouse loft that gave me room to work on large-scale installations without worrying about family interference. The space felt like freedom made physical, a place where my creativity could flourish without the constant undercurrent of disapproval or dismissal. 1 year after Cassandra destroyed my thesis work, I opened my second solo exhibition at a gallery in Seattle. This show featured entirely new work, pieces created in the aftermath of the destruction that explored themes of rebuilding, growth, and the discovery of chosen family. My parents attended the opening, flying up from Portland for the event. Their presence felt significant, an acknowledgement that my career was real and substantial, not just a phase or hobby they could dismiss. "We're learning to understand your world," my father said as we stood before my largest new sculpture, a piece called Reconstruction that incorporated elements salvaged from the original destroyed works. "I appreciate that," I replied. "Understanding has to be a choice, though. It doesn't happen automatically." "We're making that choice," my mother added. "Slowly, but we're trying." It wasn't the unconditional support I had once craved, but it was genuine effort toward change. Sometimes that's the most you can hope for from family relationships damaged by years of misunderstanding and dismissed dreams. The piece that drew the most attention at the Seattle exhibition was Evidence, an installation that incorporated actual fragments from my destroyed thesis work alongside new sculptural elements representing resilience and growth. The piece was both memorial and manifesto, a way of honoring what had been lost while celebrating what had been built from the wreckage. A young woman approached me during the opening reception, her eyes bright with recognition and emotion. "I saw the article about your first exhibition," she said, "about how your family destroyed your work. My brother did something similar to my writing, deleted years of work, because he was jealous of the attention I was getting. Reading about how you responded gave me the courage to keep writing and to set boundaries with my family." Her words reminded me that my story had resonated far beyond the art world. The intersection of family dynamics and creative expression was something many people understood from personal experience. As the evening wound down, Marcus approached me with news that would have seemed impossible just 1 year earlier. "The Museum of Contemporary Art wants to discuss a major acquisition," he said. "They're interested in purchasing the entire Resilience series for their permanent collection." I thought about the journey from that devastating night in my parents' garage to this moment of professional recognition. The path had been nothing like what I had originally planned, but it had led to something more authentic and meaningful than I could have imagined. When I returned home to Portland the next week, I drove past my parents' house, the place where my artistic dreams had nearly been destroyed. The garage where I had once worked in secrecy and shame was now just a reminder of how far I had traveled, both literally and metaphorically. I parked outside and sat for a moment, remembering the woman I had been before that night of destruction. She had been talented but insecure, seeking validation from people who were incapable of providing it. The woman I had become was still talented, but she had learned to validate herself and to seek out communities that appreciated her work. My phone rang, interrupting my reflection. It was Professor Santos. "Elena, I have news that I think will interest you. The university wants to establish a scholarship in your name, the Elena Harrison Resilience in Art Scholarship. It would support students whose work has been damaged or whose artistic pursuits have been undermined by family circumstances." The idea was beautiful and meaningful in ways that went beyond personal recognition. Students like me?
I asked.
Exactly like you. Students who refuse to let other people's limitations define their possibilities. That scholarship would eventually help dozens of young artists whose families didn't understand or support their creative ambitions. It became a way of transforming my personal experience into systemic support for others facing similar challenges. As I drove to my studio that afternoon, I thought about the concept of chosen family, the community of mentors, colleagues, and supporters who had rallied around me when my biological family had failed. Professor Santos, Marcus Chun, my fellow graduate students, even the gallery visitors who had been moved by my story. They had all become part of a network that valued and protected my artistic growth. The most profound realization was that seeking their approval and support didn't diminish me the way seeking my family's approval had. When people appreciate and understand your work, supporting them in return feels natural and empowering rather than desperate and depleting. 2 years after the destruction of my thesis work, I received an invitation that felt like the ultimate validation. The Whitney Museum in New York wanted to include my work in a major exhibition called Family Interrupted: Contemporary Artists Examine Domestic Dysfunction. The invitation letter explained that my story had become legendary in art education circles, not just as an example of artistic resilience, but as a case study in how personal trauma could be transformed into universally resonant art. I called Cassandra to tell her about the Whitney invitation. Our relationship had slowly improved as she continued therapy and demonstrated genuine commitment to changing her behavior. "Elena, that's incredible," she said, and I could hear real pride in her voice. "The Whitney Museum. That's huge, right?" "It's one of the most important contemporary art museums in the country," I confirmed. There was a pause before she spoke again. "I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry for what I did. Not just sorry that I got caught or sorry that it caused problems, but sorry that I tried to destroy something that meant so much to you." "I know you are," I replied. "And I can see how much work you've done to understand why it happened. Do you think you'll ever fully forgive me?" It was a question she asked periodically, and I had learned to answer it honestly rather than giving false reassurance. "I think forgiveness is an ongoing process," I said. "I don't wake up angry at you anymore. I don't think about revenge or punishment. But I also don't forget what happened. The experience changed me in fundamental ways." "Good ways or bad ways?" "Both," I admitted. "I lost some trust in family relationships, but I gained a lot of confidence in my own resilience. I learned to value people who support my work over people who share my DNA." The Whitney exhibition opened on a crisp October evening, exactly 3 years after Cassandra had destroyed my thesis work. My parents flew to New York for the opening, their first visit to a major museum, as far as I knew. Walking through the Whitney with my work displayed alongside pieces by nationally recognized artists felt surreal. The wall text next to my installation read, "Elena Harrison's Fragments of Home" series emerges from the artist's experience of family sabotage and dismissal. Originally created as a graduate thesis, the work was deliberately destroyed by a family member who resented the attention Harrison's artistic achievements received. Rather than abandon her artistic pursuits, Harrison documented the destruction and rebuilt her practice around themes of resilience and chosen community. The resulting body of work speaks to universal experiences of family dysfunction while celebrating the power of creative expression to survive and transform personal trauma. I watched my parents read that description, their faces a mixture of pride and discomfort. The public nature of our family's dysfunction still made them uneasy, but they could no longer dismiss the significance of my artistic career. "Your work is beautiful, Elena," my mother said quietly as we stood before the main installation. "I wish I had understood earlier how important this was to you." "Understanding isn't something that happens automatically," I replied, echoing words I had spoken many times over the past 3 years. "It requires attention and effort." "We're trying to give that attention now," my father added. "Better late than never?" "Better late than never," I agreed. The opening reception was crowded with collectors, critics, and other artists whose work was featured in the exhibition. I found myself in conversations about technique, concept, and the broader social implications of art that examined family relationships. A young artist approached me near the end of the evening, her expression earnest and grateful. "I read about your story in art forum," she said. "My family disowned me when I came out as gay and decided to pursue art instead of law school. Seeing how you transformed your family trauma into your artistic strength gave me permission to do the same." Her words reminded me that my personal experience had become something larger, a template for other artists navigating family rejection and creative pursuit. The story that had begun with destruction had become a narrative of possibility. As the exhibition continued its run over the following months, I received letters and emails from people around the country who had seen the work or read about it in art publications. Many shared their own stories of family members who had dismissed, undermined, or actively sabotaged their creative pursuits. One letter particularly moved me. It came from a mother in Ohio whose teenage daughter was a talented painter, but whose father constantly criticized her artistic ambitions as impractical. "Reading about your experience helped me understand that I needed to actively support my daughter's dreams instead of just staying neutral when my husband dismissed them," she wrote. "I've enrolled her in summer art programs and helped her apply to art schools. Your story showed me that silent support isn't enough. Sometimes you have to actively defend the artist in your family." That letter made me realize that my story wasn't just about surviving family dysfunction. It was about inspiring other family members to do better. Sometimes the most powerful impact of sharing painful experiences is modeling different possibilities for people who find themselves in similar situations. 5 years after the destruction of my original thesis work, I opened my own gallery space in Portland. The gallery specialized in work by emerging artists whose personal stories intersected with their artistic practice, artists who, like me, had transformed personal challenges into meaningful creative expression. The opening exhibition was called Resilience Rising and featured work by 12 artists whose families had either actively opposed or passively dismissed their creative ambitions. The response was overwhelming, not just from the art community, but from people who had never considered themselves art enthusiasts, but who connected with the stories of perseverance and self-determination. Cassandra attended the opening, bringing her new boyfriend, a thoughtful man who asked intelligent questions about the artwork and treated my sister's attendance at an art event as completely normal. Watching her navigate the gallery opening with confidence and genuine interest felt like evidence of real growth. "I've been taking art history classes," she told me as we stood together looking at a sculpture by one of the featured artists. "I want to understand this world that's so important to you." "That means a lot," I said, and I meant it. Her effort to educate herself represented the kind of active support I had always wanted from my family. My parents had also evolved in their understanding and support. They now attended all my exhibitions, brought friends to see my work, and spoke about my career with pride rather than embarrassment. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but it had been genuine and sustained. "We were wrong about your art," my father said simply during one gallery visit. "We didn't understand what we were looking at, and instead of trying to learn, we dismissed it. I'm sorry for that." His apology was years overdue, but it was also sincere and specific. He wasn't just sorry that I had been hurt, he was sorry for the specific ways he had failed to support my dreams. As I stood in my own gallery space, surrounded by work that celebrated artistic resilience and the power of creative expression to transform personal pain, I thought about the journey from that devastating night in my parents' garage to this moment of professional achievement and personal growth. The destruction of my thesis work had felt like the end of everything I had worked toward. In reality, it had been the beginning of something much more meaningful, a career built on authentic experience, a community of chosen family who truly understood and valued my work, and a platform for supporting other artists facing similar challenges. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals become the foundation for the most meaningful triumphs. The key is refusing to let other people's limitations define your possibilities and finding the courage to rebuild on your own terms. If you're reading this and you've experienced your own version of artistic sabotage, whether from family members, friends, or others who claim to care about you, Remember that their inability to see your worth doesn't diminish your value. Their destructive actions say everything about their character and nothing about your potential. Build your chosen family carefully. Seek out mentors who understand your vision. Connect with communities that celebrate rather than diminish your creative expression. And never, ever let someone else's insecurity or jealousy convince you that your dreams aren't worth pursuing. Your art matters. Your vision matters. You matter. And sometimes, the most beautiful thing you can create is a life that proves wrong everyone who tried to convince you to dream smaller. My name is Elena Harrison, and this is how I turned the worst night of my artistic life into the foundation for everything that came after. If my story resonates with you, please share it with other artists who might need to hear that survival is possible, success is achievable, and sometimes the family you choose can give you everything the family you were born into couldn't provide. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, your creativity is stronger than anyone's attempt to destroy it.